been a stormy day 2 of the monsoon session as well, but it's an important one because the select panel has submitted its report on the GST. There is, of course, political grandstanding both from the opposition and the ruling benches. We've got two very, very special guests to discuss the GST and a lot more that's happening in Parliament. Joining us right here on ET Now on the Monsoon Storm. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. N.K. Singh of the BJP and Mr. Manish Tewari of the Congress Party. Thanks very much for being with us. Over the next 30 minutes, we hope to have a spirited discussion and one where we'll come out with outcomes. Mr. Singh, I'm going to begin with the GST because that is really the big headline grabber today. Many people believe that the GST panel recommendation that has been submitted is moving towards a half-baked, a flawed GST. You've been someone who's a part of policy making, who understands fiscal policy. Do you at one level agree with those allegations?
No, I mean, certainly who can deny that this is not a perfect GST, but who can also deny that in economic policy, the best should never become the enemy of the good. There is no doubt that in the adjustments which have been made, the fine-tunings which have been done, namely in agreeing to a total compensation for the states for 5 years, in the 1% tax which will enable really the producing countries not to lose out in the process, but to retain the composition and character of the GST Council in this particular way, certainly is a decisive step forward in giving India the advantages of a large common market, in enabling the cascading effect of multiplicity of taxes to be simplified, in improving the ease of doing business, and what experts analyze as a decisive step adding 1 to 1.5% to India's GDP. So I think if you look at the overall picture in the dynamics of the negotiating process, certainly this is a decisive step forward in India's reform initiative, a decisive step forward in giving India the advantages of a large common market.
Fair point indeed. I'm going to get this discussion to Manish Tewari from the Congress Party. There's a dissent note that has come from the Congress. There's also one that's come on the left. The question, Mr. Tewari, I'm asking is that given the circumstances, given there is so much of opposition that's coming from states, you know, previously it was the BJP ruled states, now it's the Congress ruled states. It is, of course, a very politically sensitive issue as well. My question to you really is that given all of that, this is the best solution that we could have arrived at. And like Mr. N.K. Singh pointed out, best cannot be the enemy of good. Why the dissent note then?
Well, Supriya, I entirely agree with what Mr. N.K. Singh says, that the best should not become the enemy of the good. But there is also another dimension to it. And the dimension is that we've spent a large number of years trying to negotiate the goods and services tax. And for political reasons at various points in time, the goods and services tax could not go through. If you would recall the press conference of the former Prime Minister, when he said that the BJP had made it a condition precedent that the Samjhauta Express investigation must stop for the GST to go through Parliament, you know, we seem to have travelled a long way. The fact is that having spent so much of time on it, it is perhaps appropriate that we do it in the best possible manner, because once the goods and services tax law is enacted, it would be then very difficult to gerrymander with it or to tweak it or to keep amending it. So therefore, if there is a dissent note, and frankly I have not seen the report of the select committee and neither have I seen the dissent note in any great detail, but going by what you've told me or what Mr. N.K. Singh has said, that if at all there are concerns, let us address them now. After all, we've waited so long, you know, another 3 months or another 6 months is not going to make the sky fall down.
That's a fair point. It is not going to make the sky fall down. Let us address concerns that have been raised, and some of them are legitimate. Mr. Singh, I'm going to go point by point. Alcohol, petroleum, electricity being left out of the GST, and that's one of the points where the dissent note is coming. You understand these are the biggest tax grossers. What kind of a GST are we going to have if these are not going to be included? But politically, this is not going to be pragmatic because states do not want to give up their biggest revenue streams. My question to you really is, does the GST serve a purpose when you're keeping these things away? And is there merit in the argument to get them back? Okay, let's leave them, omit them for now, but 3, 4, 5 years later, we should have the provision to bring them into the GST ambit.
But I think that in respect of some of these items, not all of these items, there is flexibility which has been given to the working of the GST Council to subsequently include within the ambit of the GST some of these items. Of course, some of the other important items do remain out indefinitely. Let me also say, however, that it has taken a long time to reach this stage. I do not think that one can really wait for the cows to come home. It is best to begin now, as we gather experience, as states begin to realize that there are gainful virtues which are created around growth and the multiplier effects of growth by even this kind of what everybody admits is a compromised GST, is not a flawed GST, and it is certainly in the overall sense a plus point as far as economic growth and momentum is concerned. It's an item on which successive governments have struggled a lot. The earlier UPA governments had done their bit, the NDA government had done their bit, and I think this is the product of many years of negotiations. We cannot allow this moment to now slip into further uncertainty and an indefinite kind of a time frame before introducing this important legislation.
I think what Mr. Tewari would want to say, we should seize the moment, get it through, but we should give it some more time if need be, considering there's so many years of negotiations that have gone into it. Mr. Tewari, I want to stick with the point of keeping important constituents out. This is the only way the deal could be clinched with the states. Whether Mr. Chidambaram was trying to do it or now Mr. Jaitley is trying to do it, 4 finance ministers in the past have tried to get the GST on board. The question is, your party had agreed to keep alcohol out. Why the dissent note today? I mean, like I said, this is one of the deal clinchers. The states would not have given up on that. And the point that Mr. N.K. Singh is making about flexibility on certain provisions, that flexibility is only for petroleum. It is not really there for alcohol, actually, just for the benefit of our viewers there.
That's a very important flexibility.
Fair point. Mr. Tewari?
Supriya, if Mr. N.K. Singh has finished, may I come in? You are absolutely correct that there is a lot of work which has gone into it, and obviously every finance minister has possibly tried to be as flexible as possible to see if a compromise can be arrived at. But you see, the problem with alcohol is different. If you are not going to have a common goods or service tax which extends to alcohol, essentially what you are going to do is have differential tax structures. And the other difficulty with alcohol is this whole gamut of prohibition, because state after state seems to be going in that direction. So ultimately, if the largest tax grosser of a state is not going to be a part of the goods and service tax structure, then what kind of a goods and service tax are we really looking at? And it really makes no sense, to keep petroleum and petroleum products out of the ambit of the GST, because eventually, if your idea is to create a common Indian market, by an underlying uniformity insofar as tariffs are concerned, then the condition precedent for that is it should extend across the board. And therefore, if it would take a little more time, a year or maybe even 2 years, to get the recalcitrant states on board, it is probably worth the effort, because my apprehension is, once you let this go through, and I'm doubtful whether it would go through the Rajya Sabha at all, but that's a different debate altogether, that once it has gone through, you will not be able to tweak it and amend it, because essentially the states would have won their turf to keep important revenue grossers out of the entire ambit or the entire scheme of the GST.
Fair point indeed, and we will discuss the number strength and whether the government has the numbers or can the opposition store it. But Mr. Singh, a very important point that has been raised by the opposition and some experts around taxation have also voiced that concern is that the 1% or up to 1% additional tax that the states can levy is going to have a cascading effect. It is going to disrupt markets. You can't deny that, can you?
No, but the point is this, that isn't it a fair point that as far as the manufacturing states are concerned, and that apprehensions are to be really fully allayed, then this was one mechanism which enables certain equalization to take place between the producing states and the consuming states. So from that point of view, there is a logic on equity, even though it may be somewhat distortionary in its impact, to really impose this kind of a 1%. As far as the very important point that Mr. Tewari has raised, and I think that permit me to respond to it, I think on petroleum, clearly, as you mentioned very correctly, and I had also pointed out, that it is really the flexibility with the GST Council when it begins to work will exercise. As far as alcohol is concerned, as you had already pointed out to Mr. Tewari, that it was the previous finance minister, the Congress finance minister, which had chosen to keep alcohol out. So this is not something which we have done. We have only continued with the kind of an arrangement which the Congress government had really to some extent bequeathed to us. And of course, as far as numbers are concerned, I do believe that in the overall sense, in spite of all these compromises, look at, for instance, what Govind Rao has said today, and I do regard him as a credible fiscal expert, that this GST, even in its compromised form, as he calls it, is a growth multiplier for the Indian economy.
All right, it is a growth multiplier, and there is no denying that. Mr. Tewari and Mr. Singh, I want to do away with specifics, and Mr. Singh, I'm going to begin. This is my last question on GST, is really the show of strength. Will this important legislation, and because there is political grandstanding on both sides here, will this important economic legislation be held ransom to who can get more numbers on the floor? Is that something that you fear, and do you believe your party has the numbers to push this through, if and when, of course, the Rajya Sabha does meet?
Well, I think that you have answered the question by really qualifying the question with the last three words which you used. We are confident, Supriya, of the numbers. We are confident that at the end of the day, reason will prevail, that the legislatures will realize, particularly in the upper house, which is the House of Elders, that this is something which is vital for India's economic good, that the House will be allowed to function and not held ransom to a new kind of obstructionist politics which is being played, and that India's economic growth will not be held ransom to this kind of really a new form of obstructionism which has been displayed in the last 2 days in Parliament.
All right. Obstruction, your party once said, is one of the legitimate ways in parliamentary democracy, but it always depends on which side of Treasury benches do you sit and those positions come in. But Mr. Tewari, on a very candid note, the SP, the TMC, the NCP are backing the government on the GST. It's the dissent that's coming from the Congress and one from the left. AIADMK is still very ambivalent with its position. Do you fear that the Congress could actually be left isolated on this GST issue?
Well, Supriya, first of all, I'm quite amused by the nomenclature, new disruptionist politics. You know, after wiping out session after session of Parliament in the last decade, after articulating on the floor of the Rajya Sabha that disruption is a legitimate parliamentary tactic, after saying it on the floor of the Lok Sabha that we believe in the philosophy of walkouts as opposed to talkouts. So coming from the BJP, it is indeed very rich to even suggest that this is some new form of obstructionism which the Congress has evolved. I guess they just have to rewind to their own conduct, 1 year ago, and they'll know what obstructionism means. Coming to the substantive part of what you raised, is the Congress scared that it will find itself isolated on the question? It is not a question of isolationism. It's a question of principle. And as I earlier pointed out, that having waited so long, it perhaps would be far more prudent to have a proper, unflawed, uncompromised GST than the kind of pish-pash that you have in the current form. And there are also legitimate concerns that there are corporate oligarchs who have possibly worked on this government to keep certain things outside the ambit of the GST. And so therefore, if that apprehension, turns out to be correct, that there is, more than just public policy which has influenced the approach of the government with regard to the GST, then I guess it raises very legitimate apprehensions and questions about the integrity of the entire process. So therefore, I do not think that isolationism is going to stop the Congress party from taking a principled position on the goods and services tax.
Political positions are always questionable, Mr. Tewari and Mr. Singh. You know better than me here. But Mr. Singh, the point that Mr. Tewari is raising is legitimate. You know, Pranab Mukherjee said as President of India that debate, discussion, decision and deliberation should be parts of parliamentary proceedings. Disruption should come last. Here we are seeing a lot of disruption happen in Parliament. Isn't it perhaps true that what the Congress is doing is just paying the BJP back in its own penny?
Well, let me make two brief observations. First of all, I am really amused that the Congress, which practiced the worst form of crony capitalism, is now trying to suggest that there are corporate pressures which have led to this kind of a compromised position on the GST. It is the Congress party which lent itself to the worst kinds of corruption and scams that India's recent economic history has done. And that really answers the second question, the disruptionist policies that they allege the BJP followed. Why do they forget that here are instances which have been not investigated? There is no financial malfeasance which is attached to Sushma's conduct whatsoever. That this is in sharp contrast to the CAG report having really pointed out the huge scams in 2G, the loss of what appears to be a 1.67 lakh crores on coal auction, the kind of malfeasance exhibited in the Commonwealth Games. They were really mind-boggling financial scandals which cannot be really compared to the kind of situation on the basis of which they intend to pursue this policy, which is completely disruptive.
All right, this is not about illegality, this is more about impropriety is essentially the sum of your argument there. But Manish Tewari, comment on that. This is, why aren't you letting Sushma Swaraj speak? She is willing to make a statement on the floor of the House. What Arun Jaitley said in Parliament today is that the Congress or the opposition at large is changing goalposts every day. First, you wanted a discussion. When they were prepared for discussion, you wanted a resignation. When they denied you that, you then wanted her statement. Now, when she's willing to make a statement, you want a probe to be set up. What is it that the opposition wants, and why not let Sushma Swaraj speak? Because people at large would like to listen to why she did what she did, which by every standard is improper.
Well, the Bharatiya Janata Party, Supriya, has sowed the wind, and now they are reaping the whirlwind. Unfortunately, when the boot is on the other foot, it is always very uncomfortable when it connects to your posterior. But be that as it may, let me come on to the specifics of it. You know, Mr. N.K. Singh went across the board and made very sweeping charges. The fact is that in none of these issues, on the question of criminality, any court has spoken till now, notwithstanding the campaign of calumny which was carried out for more than 4 years by the Bharatiya Janata Party. And on the specific of what is the charge against the External Affairs Minister, the charge is that you are trying to facilitate the travel of somebody who's a fugitive from the law, and you are not even doing it directly. You are doing it indirectly. If, for example, the government of India felt that their milk of human kindness was overflowing in the case of Mr. Lalit Modi, they could have given him a travel document to go to Portugal and come back, rather than this wink and nudge at the British government saying that, you know, you can take your own call, essentially saying that they have no problem if the British government facilitates the travel of Lalit Modi all over the world. Where this becomes, completely and absolutely reprehensible is that there are thousands and thousands of youths, you know, who unfortunately fled this country from troubled areas in circumstances which were very ignominious at that point in time. Most of them have no criminal charges against them. And when they ask for travel documents to come back home in order to possibly attend the cremation of a parent, that travel document is denied to them, saying that you are a fugitive from the Indian law, even when there are no charges pending against them. That is number one. And number two, you know, Mr. N.K. Singh went across the board about humongous numbers. What about the 40 dead bodies which litter the entire Vyapam scam? Is there any criminal investigation, or is there any criminal case in the history of jurisprudence where 40-odd witnesses have died and accused have died under mysterious circumstances, and there's a brazen cover-up? After all, as responsible citizens of India, forget the opposition, don't you have a moral responsibility to ensure that the person on whose watch these deaths took place needs to step aside to facilitate an impartial probe? Are these illegitimate demands?
I'm going to interrupt you there and get Mr. Singh here, because you're raising some important points there, and some of the charges I'm sure Mr. Singh would like to respond to. I'm going to take two of them at one time. Sushma Swaraj, you know, there is no illegality in what she's done. Of course, it's improper behavior. She needs to explain why did she help an economic fugitive from India. The question, Mr. Singh, I'm raising on Sushma Swaraj is that shouldn't Caesar's wife be above all kind of suspicion? Shouldn't she just step aside for the moment, because there is just so much of noise and allegations that are coming, and explain her position? That's point number one. And why is the Prime Minister so silent on this? And point number two is, Vyapam is a mess that is right under the nose of the BJP. Why are they not talking about it?
Well, let me say a couple of points. First and foremost, let me say that when the former Finance Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, had written a letter to his counterpart, which he wants to be published, in the letter, in the substance of the letter, there was only one important sentence, that Indo-UK relations would be impaired if really there was any kind of a travel permitted for this person who was really not subjecting himself to Indian law. After that, what did that government do for 4 solid years? It was under his direct superintendence and charge that the investigations were taking place by the Income Tax and the Enforcement Directorate. They took no action whatsoever. The purpose seems to have been served by just ensuring that he was banished out of India. And that is why, because the investigations in those 4 years remained so tardy, that till today there is not a single criminal charge which was really levied against Mr. Lalit Modi. And that it is this government which in a short period of time has really issued now a letter regulatory, has started taking steps for bringing him to books under the Money Laundering Act, and the serious action has really begun now. As far as Sushma Swaraj is concerned, let me say this, that whether there is an impropriety and a conflict of interest which is being alleged, why not allow her to make a statement and clarify her position in Parliament? Why prevent her from what is really her legitimate due? Since allegations are just being levelled in the media and elsewhere against her, she should be allowed this opportunity to do so. As far as the scam of Madhya Pradesh is concerned, that an independent inquiry and investigation has been launched, that there is nothing at the moment which really connects the Chief Minister to any of these deaths which have taken place. And if moral culpability is concerned, then I think that Dr. Manmohan Singh should have resigned multiple times. Every time a charge sheet which under a government under his superintendence was filed, he should have resigned couple of times certainly, and many more times when the CBI found that on account of derelict conduct. And as regards the business of the scams are concerned, the fact that prosecution not yet final, does it really mean that the market has not spoken, that government had lost 1.67 crore lakh in the coal auction, that government had lost substantially, that particular theory of zero loss which had been promoted as far as the telecom losses are concerned have been proved to be false. Large sums of money government have lost, which has now been realized.
I am not going to let this become a political mudslinging of sorts, and so I have to quote quick closing comments from you. Manish Tewari, you the principal opposition, I have the ruling alliance with me. The question is that both of you are of course looking at political options to fight this out. The fact is that Indian economy and economic legislation is the big casualty of this. Who is going to bat for that? Manish Tewari.
Well, Supriya, you're absolutely correct. It's the job of the government to walk the extra mile. We do not want to disrupt Parliament. But what are legitimate demands need to be adhered to. The foreign minister needs to step aside, and insofar as speaking and making a defense is concerned, the entire public space is open to her. Why doesn't she come on your television channel on the political counterpart of your television channel and actually come and make her point? She's been hiding from the media since the 11th of June when the story broke out. So why try and hide behind parliamentary privilege to actually come out with your defense? If you are a public person, you can make your defense in the public space. So therefore, if economic reform legislation is going to become the casualty of politics, the responsibility squarely rests with this government. And unfortunately, when it comes to being brazen, I would like to point out to Mr. N.K. Singh that you have a Prime Minister in the saddle who possibly brazened out the largest pogrom which was carried out in the history of independent India.
All right, Mr. Singh, I'm going to let you have the last word on this because you're from the ruling alliance. Mr. Tewari has really put the onus of decision-making and keeping the Indian economy intact and the legislations intact on you. But, you know, market participants, India and global investors are worried that who's really batting for the cause of Indian economy here. And very soon, both parties are going to slip into election mode because there's Bihar coming up and there's going to be West Bengal and then, of course, UP.
Well, I mean, there is no doubt that the obligation for fostering policies which promote India's economic growth is something which really rests with the government. We are not running away from that obligation, but the obligation to really foster, promote policies which are bipartisan in nature, which have commenced earlier, which will bring India multiplier benefits of economic growth, is something on which we do not expect a politics of blind obstructionism, but we really expect and seek a kind of a dialogue which would enable these legislations to go forward, for which we have been waiting for long.
It's legislations that not just you or your party, but Indian economy and India at large is waiting for long. We do hope that the opposition and the government is going to find a common ground as far as India's economic future is concerned. It's been a pleasure talking over the last 30 minutes with both Mr. Manish Tewari and Mr. N.K. Singh. Thanks very much, both of you, for being with us.
Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.